dignity that they deserve. Ugandans have been tortured and killed for very many years. It has been happening, it is happening, and it will continue to happen until we as Ugandans put an end to it.
So are you planning to go back to Uganda?
Of course I'm going back to Uganda. Uganda is my home. I don't have any other home. That is where I was born, and that is where I will be buried.
Aren't you afraid to go back to Uganda?
I'm not afraid, because being here already is torture. I'm away from my family, I'm away from my children, and I'm away from fellow Ugandans who were tortured. You know, I'm only lucky that I have the ability to come for specialized treatment, but I'm not scared.
Hello family, it's African Esquire and welcome to the Federation of African Liberation. What we're going to talk about today is the circumstances that are going on in Uganda pertaining to an activist and political leader named Bobi Wine. But before we even get there, I want to say that these circumstances could possibly be a positive sign of neocolonialism coming to the point where it is now on its last leg. And the reason I say that is because the guise is being taken off of the neocolonial powers to where they either have to answer for the things that they are doing, they have to answer for their support of these governments that is basically against the laws of the neocolonial regimes, and we're going to talk about in particular the United States, or they're going to have to find some type of way to legitimize themselves being inside of these countries despite the fact that so many people are poor. And this is where we're coming to in neocolonialism, because at some point you're going to have to answer for your support of these corrupt leaders. Now what is going on in Uganda is basically you have a president who has been president for decades. This is the story in so much of Africa. We have politicians who have been politicians for 30 years, presidents who have been presidents for 30 years. So if you can imagine, this guy was a president of Uganda when Clinton was in office. So since Clinton has been gone out of office, we've had Bush, we've had Obama, we've had Trump. Imagine this whole time, and all of those were 8-year well, I'm sorry, with Trump, we're still in his first term, but other than that, Clinton was an 8-year term and Bush was an 8-year term. So, and Obama was an 8-year term. So imagine through all of this time where we've had rotating presidencies and numerous elections here in Uganda, there has been the same president, and that is Yoweri Museveni. Now, this politician is one that is very beloved by the West, in particular by the United States. In fact, when Idi Amin was put out of power, this was the one that was going to basically be the new the new teacher's pet for the United States. This is going to be the one who was going to basically do whatever the West wanted as far as trading things like oil and giving the West the advantage. We also see, of course, China is now inside of this region, and so now they're looking to this type of regime in order to legitimize their presence in Uganda and also throughout all of Africa. This was the setup, and of course, like all of these dictators, Museveni has been very brutal to his people. He has been ensuring that he remains in power. And understand, whenever these leaders are so vile and so willing to kill people and willing to sell off the resources of the country to people who don't have the country's interest in mind, when they're so willing to do that, they're not trying to be president because they love the people. They're not trying to be president because they love their country. They're trying to be president because once they're no longer president, basically their pockets are going to be without a constant source of income. Their lavish lifestyles, their lavish state of living is going to be unsupported at that point, because what you see that they're getting from the United States government, this type of lifestyle would not be sustained if not for the neo-colonial deals that are going on behind the scenes inside of these countries. So you have this president who has been president for a long time, and I actually want to read just a couple of excerpts from an article that I found on this president. This is on blackstarnews.com, and it was written by Milton Alamondi. Now, it says, Museveni flies in a $50 million Gulfstream jet purchased with foreign aid, even as Uganda teeters with youth unemployment at 85%. General Museveni is currently implicated in a bribe and money laundering case being tried in the U.S. courts, yet his regime continues to be a beneficiary of Western resources. Recently, the United States ambassador to Uganda, Deborah Malik, gushed in a tweet about a Western consortium that includes GE signing an oil deal refinery with dictator Museveni. At the same time, the embassy's website posts several speeches by Malik condemning corruption by the regime. This is the maniacal foreign policy. So as you see in this scenario, which happens so often with the dictators that are in the relationship between neocolonial powers and the dictators in Africa, is that this country, and right now in particular we're talking about the United States, has said that we're anti-terrorism, we're anti-torture, we're anti-people being oppressive regimes to their own citizens, we're anti-people not having fair elections, we're anti-this, we're anti-that. They say this with one hand, but at the same time they have this wonderful flourishing relationship with dictators who are all of those things. So they only call the anti-terrorism or anti-torture card whenever it's someone that they don't want to do business with or that they don't want to remain in power. So when you have someone like a Gaddafi, when you have people who basically are willing to go against the United States interests, then you'll see these magical words, these human rights words being used inside of this context. And this is the same thing with Museveni. He has been doing horrible things to his people. He's killed many of his people. He tortures many of his people. He does not hold fair and democratic elections, yet the United States has completely ignored the fact that he's done these things. And while they say, well, we're against terrorism, we're against people not being able to have free and fair elections, they're willing to look the side eye. So that tells you that these things that they're saying is only to be used against people who go against the American interest. So here we go in Uganda with the current situation. You have Bobi Wine, who is a young politician in Uganda. He's in the parliament of Uganda. He is an opposition leader, and he is willing to speak out against the presidency of Museveni. Now, I'm not saying, whether or not I think that Bobi Wine is, just going to be the next Pan-Africanist leader or whatnot. Some people have accused him of having Western ties, and of course he is in America getting treatment, so a lot of people are looking at him sideways for possibly having ties to the United States, the same country that is funding the regime of Museveni. But regardless of that, I can say from what I've researched on him, he's someone that truly cares about the people. He's someone who's truly working for the people, and he's someone who is putting forth his best effort to do right by the people. So that qualifies him a lot more than someone who's a dictator who's not doing anything to better the lives of the people, but rather is trying to enrich themselves. So Bobi Wine has been very vocal against the government's antics. For example, when the government of Uganda in 2016, it completely shut off the internet post an election, and he was one of the ones who was willing to criticize the government openly about saying, oh, well, you no longer can have internet, or you can no longer have access to information. So this is someone who's very vocal. This is someone who has shown he is willing to go against the power structure in Uganda. And this has completely changed his life, the feeling that the fact that he's willing to be so vocal and willing to be so anti the establishment, because the government has responded by basically trying to kill him. So what we're saying is that a few weeks back, Bobi Wine's driver was actually seated where he was supposed to be seated, and the government officials or the army shot into his car, killing the driver, thinking that they killed him. They did not kill him, but they did capture him. Afterwards, they arrested him. There was a long few weeks where people didn't know where Bobi Wine was. You've seen the hashtag Free Bobi Wine. Where's Bobi Wine? Well, not that some people thought that he was dead, but in reality was that he was being tortured by the government. Now, fast forward to today. After being tortured by the government, Bobi Wine basically tries to seek medical attention in the United States. The Ugandan government, unhappy about him going to the United States to receive medical treatment, arrested him at the airport. However, he goes again, tries to receive medical treatment in the United States, and this time he is released to go. So he goes and does a press conference in Washington, D.C. today. And what was disclosed by his lawyer, and there wasn't too much information because, as his lawyer was saying, he can't really talk about the lawyer that he has. It's a lawyer for basically his dealings in as far as the United States, but the lawyer is not able to speak out against his charges that are in Uganda because he has a Ugandan lawyer especially particularly qualified to speak towards those. But the lawyer in the U.S. basically draws out that the Museveni regime has been very violent toward its own citizens, has numerous times violated the terms of international covenants, the terms of the United States' own laws, and has done things that are considered crimes against humanity. Despite this, the United States continues to not just fund foreign aid to Uganda, but also provide military arms. So the lawyer, he had mentioned two acts. The one was the Magnitsky Act, and that was an act in 2016, which basically says that the government can sanction human rights offenders by freezing their assets and ban them from entering the United States. And this was in response to torture done in Russia. He also referenced the Leahy Act. This act prohibits the United States from offering weapons and training to any unit in the security forces of a foreign country if the Secretary of State has credible information that such a unit has committed a gross violation of human rights. And this, of course, would go completely contrary to so much of the foreign policy of the United States, because over and over we see that people who are constantly violating the human rights, violating torture, violating human rights of their citizens are still receiving military aid. In fact, we see that the Trump administration is very heavy in Africa, just like the Obama administration was very heavy in Africa. And they're very heavy in providing arms and training to some of these regimes that are torturing their people or doing things that consist of terrorism to their own populations. So why is this all relevant? This brings out the fact that we are in a new era, and the era is the era of social media. It's very difficult to hide these things, and in my theory personally as to why there's so much junk inside of social media, and why me personally, like my channels, I had to back off of even entertaining this junk. I know that the junk does give you more views, it does give you more attention, you might have more subscribers. However, I really think that the junk is intentional in order to distract people from the good information that's going out. So with the internet, we have the ability to put out information that most African people around the world would not have known about. I would not have known about this Uganda issue had I not had access to the internet. And most of us would not know what's going on inside of a lot of parts of the world outside of the United States if we did not have access to the internet. However, we have this ability now to see not only is this government that is supported by the United States, as so many other regimes are, is supported by the United States, but is refusing to follow the human rights doctrines that this country has entered into, and is also violating the United States law by torturing their own citizens and committing terrorism on their own citizens. And so now we see this, and now we have the ability to look up the laws that are propagated inside of America, and the laws that are propagated inside of the United Nations and the African Union, and we have to call out, well, why is it that you're not following this? Why was this such an issue when it came to Saddam Hussein? Why was this such an issue when it came to Osama bin Laden? Why was this such an issue when it came to Gaddafi? But this isn't an issue when it comes to people who are giving you access to the African resources, giving you access to oil, giving you access to gold, giving you access to coltan. Why is it now that this is not an issue to the United States? Because it's not an issue because the United States is getting something that they care more about. So the bigger issue becomes, did you ever care about human rights? Did you ever care about what was happening to the people of these countries? Or is that just the cover that is used in order to legitimize foreign actions and foreign foreign invasions? Is that what is used to just legitimize that? And I think most of you probably have figured out the answer to that, that this is what is used in order to legitimize the United States going into places like Iraq, going to places like Afghanistan, going to Libya, going into any place where they deem someone an enemy and someone that's not willing to serve their interests. That is the guise that is used. It's terrorism. It's torture. We had to do it because if not, it would have been genocide. But we're going to ignore the genocide in the Congo. We're going to ignore the genocide inside of Togo. We're going to ignore the genocide inside of all of these other countries because it's not profitable to the United States to call this out. This is not just America, of course. This is the whole West. But in particular, I'm responding to the press conference done by Bobi Wine's lawyer, where he does specifically call out there are laws that the American taxpayers, we are paying for these regimes because it's considered international necessities, but this money is being used in order to control the region and not to allow people to actually be free, not allow people to actually practice this thing called democracy that supposedly is so good to us. So it's something to consider. Speaking to my people throughout the diaspora, I would say that it is truly our responsibility to be literate, to be well aware of these laws. I've said this many times on my channel that it is very important for us to not just learn human rights laws, and us, me included, because I'm not an international rights attorney, but my goal is to be so well versed inside of international law that I can confidently talk about the many inconsistencies as far as neocolonialism that is going on inside of the world. So it's our responsibility to just know what's going on as far as the United Nations, this whole charter that the United States has signed, almost all of the charters. So is the United States adhering to the charter? Is your country, is the UK adhering to the charter? Is Germany adhering to the charter? The UK, they're so happy to send their prime minister over to Africa, and Germany was so happy to send Angela Merkel over to Africa as well. Are these people who are so happy to adhere to this or to go into Africa, are they actually standing by what they have said that they will not stand for as far as human rights standards, or are they ignoring it when it's convenient to ignore these issues? And more likely than not, you're going to find these people ignore issues whenever it would hurt their interest or the economic interest of their country, but they will be very vocal up against the country should they find that country's interest to be contrary to the interest of their country. So calling to all of my people throughout the diaspora, we must be well versed on these laws, must be versed on the laws in our particular countries, because as citizens of our countries, we do have a right to talk to our senators, we have a right to talk to our presidents, talk to our congressmen, congresswomen, talk to people who we elect, and make public stances that you are not adhering to the laws, you are not, or the United States is not adhering to the laws that they are said to adhere to. In the UK, you have the same responsibility. In France, you have the same responsibility. We all have this responsibility that we are citizens of this country, and therefore we have a vital role to speak about what is going on as far as our countries not adhering to things that they said that they would do in the interest of Africa being hurt because of it. So African liberation is very pertinent to us in the diaspora, and it's very important that we make sure that we are carrying our load and our responsibility in speaking out against these things when they happen. Not just speaking out, but actually knowing the laws that back it up. And that does not only pertain to us, but particularly us on the continent. We have a responsibility to know what the African Union has signed, what they have said, who is in the African Union, why has the African Union not followed up on certain things, why has the African Union ignored Paul Kagame, who has imprisoned his political opponents without even and has really ignored the direction of the African Union, but still has the authority to sit in the African Union and pretend as though he is obeying the African Union. How is it that you can reconcile this? Do you have power, or are you just trying to act like you have power so that you can say, well, hey, we tried our best and we did what we could? The basic issue is, do we have the power in these different institutions? Are we pretending that we have the power? Or if you do have the power, why aren't you doing something about it? We all have an important role to play as far as advocating in wherever we are, whether you're on the continent or whether you're in the diaspora. So that is my message, really, as part of the Federation of African Liberation. That is our individual responsibilities to know and speak out against these issues. Related to that, we have a human rights blog for FAL. So if you're interested in learning, as we educate ourselves, we try to share with other people what the rights are in different African countries. So if you are interested in learning more about the human rights laws, international law, then please follow our blog. And if you want to contribute to the blog, please let us know. We are always open to getting more voices and more information. So that's all I have for this particular subject, and I will see you all in another video.